But I made it. I moved. Remember last month I was like 10, 15 minutes late because I had trouble getting out of the last event. There's too many people. And then it was like a 20-minute drive. So this time I was like, I want a 5-minute drive. So I was just over in Sunny Slope. So luckily, even though I went 20 minutes late, I made it. We have all of these people. Yeah. We have a big crowd. I don't know if they're all fans. I don't know if they're all fans, but we'll see. Yeah.
Hey guys! I see some people are ready for the Patriots game tomorrow. Are there any Falcon fans in the crowd? Yeah, we got 3 Falcon fans. Patriots fans? We got 3 Patriots fans. Cardinals fans who all lost and gave up? Yeah. Oh, the commercials. The Budweiser commercial is supposed to be a big deal. I've been reading, I saw a little clip of it, that the Budweiser commercial is supposed to be like this ode to immigrants. And that they made the commercial before all the so there you go. I know we still have folks who are coming in. You're fine. Everyone's good. Well, you got plenty of time to make it in. Where you're going to sit, I don't know. We've never had a crowd this large before. I don't know what would have changed to make some people want to come. Hey, Catherine, you look good today. How are you doing? Oh, goodness. Yeah. At least we have a big enough crowd. Is there anyone over here that doesn't want to be a part of today's coffee club? That guy, he's like, I am out. Sorry. Okay. Wow. Welcome to Coffee Club, everyone. Who's here for the first time? Lots and lots and lots of people. Welcome to Coffee Club. Do you need a seat, hon? Yeah, it's too sunny there. Let's see. There's some space. There's some space on a brick wall right over here. Yeah, there's some space over here. There's some space on the concrete right here.
We're going to bring out some more chairs.
We're going to bring out some more chairs. For those of you who are sitting in booths, if you don't mind scooching up a little bit to make room for other folks, that would be wonderful. We've never had this many people. Sorry. This is new. Welcome to Coffee Club. So some folks know that we've been doing Coffee Club since February of 2012 and have been coming to Coffee Club since then. Coffee Club is an event that we do every single month. Once a month, I gather folks who are campaign friends and supporters to have coffee with me, or if you want, you can have some wine or beer. I mean, it is 2017. So once a month, we get together to support the campaign. What I try to do in Coffee Club is give a little update about Congress. No, it's Congress, so that update is short. It's always a brief update. I give an update about what's happening kind of generally politically. That could be a longer conversation. And then I take time to answer questions. And those of you who are new, my general rule about questions is 1 question per person. Thank you so much. I don't know where I'm going to put this. Hold on, let's see. Yeah, that's safe. Totally safe. So the general rule is 1 question per person, just like, at school. The other thing I would ask is for you to please not, live stream or video, etc., etc. You can if you want. It's just not a very flattering, shot of me, so please don't. He's still doing it right there. He's like, I don't even care. So, thank you for coming, everyone. I'm going to start with a brief update of what's happening in Washington. A lot. So Congress actually has had some productivity. Some of it was good. Some of you know that a bill of mine passed on just the second week of session. So this is something I'm pretty excited about. Yeah. So we passed a bill the second week of session. It's a bill that makes it easier for startups to get access to potential investors so they can grow their technology startups. So it's kind of like Shark Tank, but without the TV. So we were pretty excited to get that bill passed through the House. The bill's gone to the Senate. Who knows what will happen there? What else has happened in the House? The House Republicans have started passing a number of bills called CRAs. This is the Congressional Review Act. So, years ago, decades ago, Congress passed a law called the Congressional Review Act. And what the law says is that any new Congress that comes in can repeal any administrative regulations that occurred 60 legislative days prior in a previous administration. Now, before you start thinking something nefarious, this is not a new law. It's actually been in place for decades. But it historically hasn't been used extensively because we have often had divided government. So it wasn't a very useful tool when you have divided government. And now, of course, the Republicans control the House, the Senate, and the president's position, the president's office, and so they are using the Congressional Review Act. And Congress has already voted on 5, I think. I don't know, it's 5, 6. We've voted on a bunch of Congressional Review Acts. These are pieces of legislation that remove regulations that were created in 60 legislative days of the last 60 legislative days of last year. Now, before you think 60 days is no big deal, let's just put this in context. 60 legislative days. Right, this was back when Congress didn't do a lot. So 60 legislative days actually goes back to last spring, because it only counts the days when Congress was in session, right? So that's important to remember. So all of the Congressional Review Act bills that have been brought to Congress so far have passed the House, and they are now moving over to the Senate. There will be more. But so far there have been bills to remove the regulation around the Federal Streams Act, for instance. Most of the Congressional Review Act regulations that have been addressed in the last 2 weeks have been attacks on the environment. And Arizona's delegation has voted party line. So the Republicans voted for, but Democrats voted against. There was one Congressional Review Act about a different issue, and I'm anticipating that some of you are concerned about it, and so I'm going to just briefly mention it. One of the Congressional Review Acts that we voted on, I think it was Thursday? I don't know, the days all run together. I think it was Thursday, was to repeal a regulation passed during the Obama administration that defined who has access to purchase a weapon in our country. And the regulation excluded individuals with mental illnesses. Now, this is important. 95% of Americans who live with a mental illness are no harm to themselves and others. But roughly 5% of individuals with mental illness do present a harm or danger to themselves or others. And those individuals, clinically, they're called dangerously mentally ill, which is different than someone who has another mental illness like depression or bipolar disorder or personality disorder. Those individuals are typically not dangerously mentally ill, though some are. So there's a difference between folks who are dangerously mentally ill and those who are not. What this regulation did was say that anyone who had a mental illness under the Social Security disability definition of mentally ill could not have access to a weapon. Now, while this regulation was being pushed through the administration, my office contacted the administration and said, this is a really bad idea. The Social Security Disability Office does not define mental illness in the way that mental health professionals define mental illness. And as some of you know, I'm a mental health professional. I have a master's degree in social work, and for a number of years before going to Congress, I was a licensed clinical social worker, which is when you have a master's of social work plus 2 years of extra experience and exams and testing, and that gives you the ability to diagnose people with mental illnesses and treat them. Does that make sense? So it's very similar to someone who, like, for instance, is a doctor of psychology, right? So myself and other mental health professionals reached out to the Obama administration and said, we don't think this is a good definition. The Social Security Disability Office, they do not make clinical mental health decisions. Their definition is not an accurate definition of those who are mentally ill and a danger to themselves or others. And unfortunately, they ignored us. So the regulation that was passed, and that was law, it still is law right now, in my opinion, includes individuals in the circle of their definition of mentally ill that should not be included. And it excludes people who should be included. So it's both too exclusive and inclusive. The bottom line is, because it's not using clinical definitions of mental illness, we believe in the mental health community that it is not a good indicator. So I voted to take away that regulation because it is based on faulty definitions that are not clinically accurate. Everyone should know this, but I'll remind everyone if you don't. I do believe that we should protect individuals who are dangerously mentally ill from getting access to weapons. Those individuals should get treatment, not access to weapons. Unfortunately, the agency that made this regulation did not consult adequately with mental health professionals. And that's why the National Alliance for the Mentally Ill, the Mental Health Coalition of America, the Center for Disability Rights, and the Center for Disability Law supported my position, which is to get rid of that regulation and start over with a regulation that uses an accurate definition, a clinical definition of mentally ill. So that was controversial. I know this is going to surprise you, but the media isn't really reporting it this way. Shocker. I know, it's sad. But that, I would say that for some of the people who are here, I'm sure that was one of your concerns. I hope this answers that concern. To be clear, I do support having a regulation and indeed a law that protects individuals who are dangerously mentally ill, so danger to themselves or others, that protects them, provides them with treatment, and ensures that they don't have access to weapons to hurt themselves or hurt other people. I think that's very important. The best way to get there is to have accurate definitions of who is mentally ill. We get to questions later. So for those who are new, I try to kind of talk about the stuff and then I answer the questions. Okay, so the other Congressional Review Act bills that we did were mostly bills that removed regulations protecting environmental protections, such as streams, encouraging treat them. Does that make sense? So it's very similar to someone who, like, for instance, is a doctor of psychology, right? So myself and other mental health professionals reached out to the Obama administration and said, we don't think this is a good definition. The Social Security Disability Office, they do not make clinical mental health decisions. Their definition is not an accurate definition of those who are mentally ill and a danger to themselves or others. And unfortunately, they ignored us. So the regulation that was passed, and that was law, it still is law right now, in my opinion, includes individuals in the circle of their definition of mentally ill that should not be included. And it excludes people who should be included. So it's both too exclusive and inclusive. The bottom line is, because it's not using clinical definitions of mental illness, we believe in the mental health community that it is not a good indicator. So I voted to take away that regulation because it is based on faulty definitions that are not clinically accurate. Everyone should know this, but I'll remind everyone if you don't. I do believe that we should protect individuals who are dangerously mentally ill from getting access to weapons. Those individuals should get treatment, not access to weapons. Unfortunately, the agency that made this regulation did not consult adequately with mental health professionals. And that's why the National Alliance for the Mentally Ill, the Mental Health Coalition of America, the Center for Disability Rights and the Center for Disability Law supported my position, which is to get rid of that regulation and start over with a regulation that uses an accurate definition, a clinical definition of mentally ill. So that was controversial. I know this is going to surprise you, but the media isn't really reporting it this way. Shocker. I know, it's sad. But that, I would say that for some of the people who are here, I'm sure that was one of your concerns. I hope this answers that concern. To be clear, I do support having a regulation and indeed a law that protects individuals who are dangerously mentally ill, so danger to themselves or others, that protects them, provides them with treatment, and ensures that they don't have access to weapons to hurt themselves or hurt other people. I think that's very important. The best way to get there is to have accurate definitions of who is mentally ill. We get to questions later. So for those who are new, I try to kind of talk about the stuff and then I answer the questions. Okay, so the other Congressional Review Act bills that we did were mostly bills that that removed regulations protecting environmental protections such as streams, encouraging non-coal-related industries, supporting renewable energy, etc. So the other Congressional Review Act bills, in my opinion, were not very controversial. They were pretty cut and dry. You either support the STREAM Act or you don't support the STREAM Act. So there you go. Okay, so that's all that's happened in Congress. The Senate, as you know, is in the process of confirming or not confirming presidential appointments. Just to clarify, I know many people know this, but in case folks are new to kind of government or being involved in government, I do not have a vote on any of the presidential appointments. I'm a member of the U.S. House of Representatives. Only the Senate has the role of advice and consent. So let me talk about that for a minute. You all know that the Senate is interviewing and voting on all of President Trump's nominations right now. Some have been done already, some are still to come. Our office has no say on any of them. So you could call my office and tell me what you think, but it would probably serve you better to call McCain and Flake, because they actually each have a vote. Each of them have one vote. The process is going differently than it has in years past. Some people have expressed to me over the past several weeks frustration and have said to me, Kyrsten, why aren't the Senate Democrats stopping these nominees? Right. So let me talk about that for a minute. 4 years ago, Harry Reid, when he was the majority leader in the U.S. Senate, was very frustrated with Senate Republicans, which at the time were led by Mitch McConnell when he was the minority leader. And Mitch McConnell's strategy was to just say no to everything, kind of like your 3-year-old. Some of you remember having a 3-year-old. Some of you have a 3-year-old. You know exactly what I'm talking about. There's a new name for it, by the way. It's called a 3-nager. Isn't that great? So appropriate, right? A 3-nager. So Mr. McConnell and the Republican strategy was to just say no to everything. And so Obama couldn't get any of his nominees through. He couldn't get his judicial appointments confirmed. And he was very frustrated. And so Harry Reid used a procedural tactic to change the rules, and he eliminated the filibuster for all presidential nominations except for the Supreme Court. So what that means is that in days past, it took 60 votes to confirm any presidential appointment that required Senate confirmation. That would be all judicial nominees and all cabinet level positions. When Harry Reid eliminated the filibuster, that means that you only need 51 votes to approve a judicial nominee apart from Supreme Court or a cabinet level appointment. And that is why all of the cabinet level appointments are passing. That's why every single one has passed. Because you only need 51 votes, not 60. And the Republicans have 52 senators. And in the instance of a tie, let's say that 2 Republican senators choose to vote no, as is likely going to happen with Betsy DeVos, she's the nomination. She's the nominee for the Education Department. Senators I have been talking too much today. My parents used to tell me that all the time. So Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins Republican senators have both said they're going to vote no on Betsy. So that would mean it's 50-50. In the event of a tie, the vice president of the country comes to the Senate because he is the Senate president, and he breaks the tie. So, in order to stop any presidential nominee, you have to have 3 Republicans vote no, and every Democrat show up to work and vote no. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So when people say, why aren't the Senate Democrats doing anything? My response is math. I mean, they're showing up to work, they're doing, they're voting, but it doesn't matter because they don't have the votes. And so, if that bothers you, call Harry Reid. I'm sure he will take your call. Some of you who've been with me for years know, I'll get to questions later. Some of you who've been with me for years know that 4 years ago when this happened, I was opposed to it. And I said, Harry Reid should not eliminate the filibuster because we will regret this one day. I regretted it right then, but I said we, people who love democracy, will regret this one day because the Senate is supposed to be a place where the rights of the minority are protected, and that has been eroded. So, the Senate confirmations are moving through. They will not be stopped, I don't think, because the votes aren't there because of math. As you know, Mr. Trump nominated a Supreme Court justice earlier this week. As of today, that vote requires 60 yes votes. As of today. However, that could change. It takes only 51 votes to change the rules to get rid of the filibuster. So, as you may have heard, Mr. Trump encouraged Mr. McConnell to eliminate the filibuster if needed to confirm Justice Gorsuch. That may or may not happen, I don't know. Mr. McConnell has, for the last 4 years, always been opposed to eliminating the filibuster. He was opposed to it when Harry Reid did it, and even as early as this week, as late as this week, he said he is opposed to it. So whether or not that changes, I don't know. But the Supreme Court nomination has just started. The Senate, as you may know, is a very slow process, and so it is likely to extend until April before he's ready for a final vote on the floor of the Senate. So from now until April, if you care about this, you can certainly reach out to our 2 senators because they have a vote. And as of right now, it will take 60 votes to confirm any Supreme Court nominee to the highest bench. As of right now, it also takes 60 votes to pass any piece of legislation in the Senate. That still exists today. But it could be in danger. We don't know. Some of you have heard that there's an attempt to repeal Obamacare. The challenge that the senators face is that they don't have 60 votes to repeal Obamacare. So they started the process to use reconciliation to repeal parts of Obamacare. Reconciliation is a budgetary process. It's the only process in the Senate that takes 51 votes instead of 60. But you can only use reconciliation for things that have dollars attached to them. You can't use it for policy. You can only use it for money. So the current Senate plan that Mr. McConnell has articulated is to use reconciliation to cut as much of Obamacare as he can, which would be the money part, and then he has to figure out how to replace it. Because to replace it, he's going to need 60 votes, which he doesn't have because of the math aforementioned, right? So, interestingly, the folks who are attacking Mr. McConnell from the right and saying, why haven't you repealed and replaced Obamacare yet? the answer to them is the same as the answer to the folks who are attacking the Senate Democrats for not stopping the nominations. Math. Right? The math isn't there. So Obamacare has been kind of put on ice for a little bit because the Republicans haven't decided how to deal with the fact that they have 51 votes to dismantle the funding, but they don't have 60 votes to replace it with anything else. So they're kind of in a holding pattern right now. I don't know what they're thinking, neither do they. I mean, they're just, they don't. They're just, I mean, some people are. I went to a dinner on Wednesday night, a dinner with the Center for Budget and Policy Priorities. That's a nonpartisan budget think tank. I respect them immensely. I would encourage you, if you're interested, to go look at their website and read about them. They want to like save Social Security and Medicare for the future, and they're pointing out that we don't have enough money. So they're doing good stuff. They hosted a dinner of Republicans and Democrats together, just a handful of each from the House. Thoughtful people who represent the entire political spectrum who are interested in actually solving this problem. And I really enjoyed the dinner. I mean, the food was fine, but what I really enjoyed was getting the opportunity to hear from some of my Republican colleagues who are very high-ranking. The vice chair of the Energy and Commerce Committee, that's the committee that deals with healthcare, and the chair of the Republican Study Committee, that's the conservative caucus of the Republican Party. Not the ultra-conservative caucus, that's the Freedom Caucus. This is the regular conservative caucus. Yeah. So there are three caucuses. There's Main Street, those are kind of like the regular, like Reagan Republicans. Then there's the Republican Study Committee, which are the conservative Republicans, and there's the Freedom Caucus. So, they're nice guys though. I mean, I like them. I don't agree most of the time, but I like them. On some things we do agree, and I'll talk about that next. So this was a really good conversation because the head of the Republican Study Committee and the vice chair for the Healthcare Committee basically shared their thoughts about Obamacare. And of course, once they started talking, I said, oh, I have some questions for you. So I said, tell me what your model is, what's your plan, what's your vision, and they told me kind of their ideas, some of which are reasonable and some of which I think, from my opinion, were not practical or workable, but some were good. And then I said, how are we going to get this done? Like, you don't have the votes. Like, what are you going to do? And that was an interesting conversation, too, because no one has yet gotten to the part of how to figure out how to get the votes to do something different. And it's a shame because there is a bipartisan hunger to make changes to the Affordable Care Act because parts of it don't work. The exchanges don't work. Like in Arizona, the exchange is crumbling. It had 116% increase in payments this year at the same time that people's deductibles and copays were increasing. So it's not affordable, and we only have one provider in most of the state. So, and they've already said they're not going to do it again next year. So the exchanges are not functioning effectively, and we do need to build something else. Hopefully, with math, we'll get there. As people start to understand the math, then maybe they'll be more interested in finding a bipartisan solution that gets us to 218 and 60, which is what we need to get something to the president's desk. So that's where we are on Obamacare. People ask me about it all the time. The answer is, I don't know, we'll see. We're kind of in a holding pattern. The last thing I want to talk about is something I mentioned. We talked about this a little bit at our last month's coffee club. And it's the area where I'm going to spend all of my time and energy focusing on as we move forward. I am concerned about our democracy. I was raised in a conservative household, many of you know this, by parents who wrong and inappropriate if you love our country and our Constitution. So I disagreed very strongly with that. I also disagreed at times, as some of you know, with President Obama's use of executive actions. President Obama utilized executive actions to a greater extent than any president before him ever in history. Hold on. George W. Bush utilized executive actions at any rate greater than anyone prior to him in history. Bill Clinton used executive actions at every rate higher than anyone before him in history. So what do presidents do? Presidents use their power. So, some of you who've been with me have heard me say this again. Please be patient, as I say, I know you guys, you've heard me say this over and over. I opposed the utilization of executive action in many instances over the last 4 years. Not based on the substance, not based on the substance of the text, but based on the use of the action. Now, many have said to me, well, President Obama used executive action because Congress is broken and didn't do his job. Well, that is true. Congress is broken. Congress has not done its job. For over a decade, Congress has been broken. It doesn't do its job in the checks and balances. Because in an appropriate Congress, if you didn't like a president's executive action, you would pass a bill to override it. Because statute overrides executive orders. But because we had a broken Congress, Congress just complained about it and never did anything about it, right? So that check and balance has broken down significantly in the last 2 decades. And over the last 4 years, I expressed my concern that with the continued expansion of the use of executive action, including into areas that were questionable in terms of constitutional and legal authority, it set a precedent. It set a precedent. And I expressed concern that maybe a future president would use executive actions even more. And now we're in 2017. As you all know, President Trump has used executive actions exclusively in the last 14 days. What he has not yet done is reach out to Congress to say, hey, Congress, I'd like you to pass this law. Or, hey, Congress, let's work together to advance this agenda item that I have. Instead, he has just acted unilaterally. And I have said that I oppose this. And I hope that people of both political parties or neither will hear me fairly, because I said this in the last administration too. In my opinion, this is not a function of party or partisanship. This is a function of protecting the checks and balances of our government. Congress makes the laws. The executive implements the laws. The judiciary adjudicates whether or not the laws are proper, legal, and constitutional. And so I will be focused in this term on helping my colleagues in the Congress rise to the occasion of appropriately utilizing the checks and balances that our forefathers intended when they created the 3 branches of government. I will also stand to support an independent judiciary that makes decisions based on the rule of law and the Constitution, irrespective of the politics of the moment. And I believe, I hope, that I can do this with some authority because I did this when we had a president of a different party. And it is my hope